Hi everybody, it's Wendy Perry here, and I wear a couple of hats. I'm the Managing Director of Workforce Blueprint and also the Entrepreneurship Facilitator for Adelaide. Great to have you in this recorded session today. We are going to talk about how to get onto the NDIS. I know it's an area that can be complex and tricky and difficult to figure out how to do that. Today we have got Cassie Day. She's the Managing Director of the Carers Place, very experienced in this area, and she's going to run us through a bit of a presentation. There'll be some questions as we go along, and feel free to reach out if you've got any specific questions that you'd like after the session. So Cassie, perhaps if I could just ask you to introduce yourself and then we'll kick off with the content and the presentation. So over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who is here as well. As Wendy said, I'm the Managing Director of the Carers Place, and we primarily provide support coordination services across the country to people living with disability and their families. I wear a couple of different hats. So I have been a support coordinator, am a support coordinator, but what led me to that was the fact that my son is a participant on the scheme and transitioned back in 2016 to be a participant on the scheme. And so there are a couple of the different hats that I wear. I'm very, very passionate about this sector and people getting the things that they need, getting access to the things that are going to make their lives a little bit easier, and it's our job to facilitate that process.
Excellent, thanks for that, Cassie. Would you want to just bring up your slides? And I know that there might be some things that people want to sort of follow up with you. So let's run through some of that content, because it is sort of tricky if you don't know your way around it. I know that there'll be a number of people that are also looking at potential ways for them to serve NDIS clients. From a business point of view, we've got a webinar on that later, but it's still really important to know how to get onto the NDIS. So back to you and let's kick off.
Yeah, thank you. So please stick with us. If you do have any questions, you can of course put them in the chat. This is, a little bit of dry content here, but we'll try and keep it a little bit light. And really just wanting to support people to know how to get onto the NDIS. It can be quite complex, and there are so many links and rabbit warrens that we can kind of fall into, and it can all just get a little bit much and a little bit overwhelming. So what we're trying to do here is just to bring it all together in a little bit more of a simple format. I'll be providing some tools for you to take away after the session, just so that it can make it that little bit easier for you. So we'll be covering today the role of the NDIS, NDIS eligibility criteria, that's really important. Some of the evidence that you're going to need, and we'll talk a little bit about what evidence is shortly. So we'll give you some handy links and some tools that you can use, how to actually apply. And of course, as I said before, we've got some questions by chat. So what is the NDIS? The NDIS is the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and if you're here today, I'm sure that you know that already and that you've heard that before. But it is a way of providing individualised support for people with a disability, their families and carers. Now, the NDIS will provide all Australians with a permanent and significant disability, that's really important, permanent and significant, under the age of 65, with reasonable and necessary supports. Okay, so if you are over 65, then we have a system in Australia called My Aged Care, and if you are over 65 and you do have a disability, that is going to be and it's a new disability, that is going to be the only scheme that is going to be able to support you. So there are a range of objectives that the NDIS has. And I will go through some of these with you, but there's some key things here for you to be aware of. So the first, and I think one of the most important, is supporting you as the potential participant, the independence and social and economic participation of people with disability, providing reasonable and necessary supports, including early intervention for participants. Just to note there, early intervention doesn't have to be those early years. It can be early intervention in terms of the life of your disability or your functional impairment. So that is really important to understand and know. And at any time, somebody can access the NDIS under the early intervention criteria. Also, to enable people with disability choice and control, and it's probably something that you might have heard thrown around quite a lot, in pursuit of their goals. Facilitating a nationally consistent approach as well. So in years gone by, it has disability supports have been provided on a state-by-state basis in a block funding style. So this is trying to individualise supports for people as well. And of course, we're wanting to ensure, or they are wanting to ensure, and I'm a big fan of this, is high quality and innovative supports to people with disability. And that is really important, but we're not going to talk about that so much today. So before we go anywhere, we need to know and we need to understand why we would get access to the NDIS. Not everybody will get access to the NDIS. So you might have a disability support pension. However, you're not necessarily immediately entitled to access. So to access the NDIS, you need to have a permanent and significant disability that stops you from doing everyday things by yourself. This includes disabilities that are episodic, such as people who have a significant and lifelong psychosocial disability. And it's important to note that I'm sharing information that is specific from the NDIS Act and from the NDIS website. So this isn't information that I've made up. This is quoted information and factual information as well. So I just want to flag here some important tools and reference points that you can access. As I said before, and as you'll hear at the end of the presentation, I'm actually doing up a tool for you that will be sent out with a copy of this recording that lists all of the references and the links to all of the different things that we refer to here. There's too many for you to remember or to write down yourself. So I thought it was best that we did it that way, and it will be accompanied by a checklist. So one of the most important references that you can have a look at, and it's really in two different forms. It's in just a general form, but also an easy read form as well, which is the NDIS booklet number 1. And it really gives general information about the NDIS, how to access the NDIS. It goes through different terms and things that you need to know before you actually apply. It is where I have gotten some of my information from, and you can download it off of the NDIS website. You can Google simply NDIS Booklet 1 and it will take you straight there, or you can go into an NDIS office or LAC office, which is the local area coordinator, who are like a broker for NDIS. So that's Booklet 1. There's a link here for how to apply. And that does take you to all sorts of different links, and that's where I'm talking about you being able to kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit warren. So that's why I'm bringing the information together. The access request form, which is a really important form that we're going to talk about later, and the am I eligible link here as well, which will take you to some key information about perhaps your disability or circumstances where you can answer some questions for yourself. But we're going to go through some of that stuff now. So just for your reference, this is what Booklet 1 looks like. I just thought I would put it up there so that you can recognise it, because we're just covering so many topics. It's good to have a visual there. So we're going to cover some key criteria here to work out if you're eligible, because if you don't meet some of this criteria here, then you may not be eligible, and we're going to need to get a little bit more help to make sure that you're making the right decision or you're accessing the services that you need. There may be community services through health or other government departments that may be able to assist you. So key criteria, as I said before, under the age of 65. You must have Australian residency. Now, You can be on certain visas, but that is very, very clear criteria and will be contained in one of the links and the information that I send out to you with the recording. So they really need to assess, they being the NDIS, if you need help to complete everyday tasks or participate in community. And we're going to talk a little bit later about what that means, but in short, do you need help from another person? Do you need special equipment to help you in your day-to-day life, getting around? And that could be, do you need some aids for walking or to transfer from a chair to standing, something else? So it could be as simple as, aids in the kitchen for your hands. So there's a whole range of different things that can mean. And of course, modifications to your home. And I guess some of the simple examples are, you could have been a fully functioning person and you may have had a stroke. And from that stroke, you may have ended up with some disabilities. And so maybe you need some modifications to your home to ensure that you can live in your home safely. And also, do you need some supports now to reduce your future needs? And that's where we're talking about early intervention. And there's different criteria on early intervention, but we're just going to keep this general for today. So providing evidence, this is like the linchpin to everything. If you are asking to access the NDIS by giving them a call or writing them a letter, without providing evidence, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get access immediately, and the NDIS is going to come back to you and ask for more information. And from my perspective, I like to be able to have my clients, my participants be able to present all of the information all at once. What it does is just reduces the stress and overwhelm of the whole process. It may take a little bit longer, but it's absolutely critical for you to be able to get access sooner rather than later in the most efficient and effective way. So the NDIS is responsible for determining who is eligible to access the NDIS. They need to know and they need to determine whether you meet disability or early intervention access requirements, and that's why you need to provide that evidence. Now, this includes information on what your disability is, how long it will last, and how it impacts your life. There are some disabilities that aren't necessarily deemed as lifelong. So there's different criteria for access. So I just wanted to talk about what good evidence is. We're going to go into the evidence part of this webinar now. And this is a little bit difficult to get your head around. And there's some language barriers here that, between different government systems that I want to clarify for you. So first of all, I'm going to have a drink of water. And then we're going to get into it. Okay, so what is good evidence? So some of the things that we need to consider are that your evidence needs to be recent. And that means really, if we can, within the last 6 months. Okay, 6 to 12 months maximum. And that could be any information or reports that are completed by your treating professional who has experience relevant to your primary disability. Okay, so that's the primary reason that you are on the NDIS and accessing supports. Your evidence needs to confirm your disability, but more importantly, your levels of impairment and the impacts on different areas of your life and what you might hear referred to as your functional capacity. Okay, that is a word that will come up often, particularly if you do get access to the NDIS. You're going to hear lots and lots of odd words that probably don't make a whole lot of sense to you, but are crucial and critical in the world of the NDIS. So that's functional capacity. Your evidence also needs to list your history of your treatments and outcomes, what's happened in the past and where has that led you to. And then it also needs to list current and future treatment options and expected outcomes. Okay.
Cassie, can I just ask you a quick question?
You absolutely can.
So where you've got completed by your treating professional, I guess some participants would have multiple professionals working with them, wouldn't they?
Yep.
So is that information need to kind of like link to each other or be coordinated in some way?
It certainly needs to be consistent. It doesn't need to link to each other necessarily. And there's no limit on how much information and evidence you can present to the NDIS. So we're going to talk about an access request form later, but we're also going to talk about different forms of evidence and what that can look like. And that's going to be specific to each person as well. We'll also go through the fact that there is a list of likely to be approved disabilities and what actual evidence is recommended to be provided as a base for those specific ones as well. But again, to answer your question, no, they don't have to be completely linked. However, they do need to be consistent.
Okay, and also on the history of treatments and outcomes, does that have to go back?
I just missed the end of your question there. Does that have to go back?
Sure. With the history of treatments and outcomes, does that have to go back a certain time frame, or should it go back indefinitely? Like, is there some sort of recommendation around that?
Not that I have. I would personally recommend whatever is relevant and links into your current application. And that could be old diagnoses or old treatment plans. That could be 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You could be asking for access, 10 years after a disability or an accident or something like that. So that information is absolutely imperative, excuse me, and it helps the NDIS, and then of course planners thereafter be able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together to make sure that they're not missing anything.
Cool, no worries, thanks for that.
So exactly what we were just talking about, Wendy. So the types of evidence. So for some more common disabilities, you can have a look at this link. Again, I'm going to put that in the information that's sent out to you. And it's called Types of Disability Evidence. And if you go to that link, you will see a plethora of different disabilities. And if you click on each one of them, it'll have a little drop-down box and it will list the specific types of assessments or reports that are required or highly recommended to accompany your access request. And that's going to be obviously different for, say, somebody who might have had a stroke or who has a psychosocial disability or, was born with a disability such as, say, autism. So in terms of the type of evidence and what it needs to contain, just a little bit of information here. So your treating professional will need to provide evidence that you have or are likely to have a permanent disability, including information about the type of disability, the date your disability was diagnosed, if that's available, how long the disability will last, remembering it needs to be permanent, and available treatments. They also need to demonstrate how your disability impacts on your everyday life. So looking at what the NDIS will call domains as well, life domains. So we're looking at mobility and motor skills, your communication skills, your ability to interact in a social setting, your learning, self-care and self-management. And we're going to go through what these mean. So list A, if you were to Google, and I'll put a link in again of list A of conditions which are likely to meet the disability requirements as part of Section 24 of the NDIS Act. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed, just likely. So people who can provide the evidence, your GP and paediatrician, allied health practitioners such as a psychologist, social worker, occupational therapist, speech pathologist, physiotherapist, all of those people can provide evidence. Orthopedic surgeon, a neurologist, a psychiatrist, and you. So again, the information needs to be current. And you don't just have to get evidence from one treating physician either. It can be from a plethora of different people. Often when you have a disability, you have a team of people that have or may have supported you in different aspects of your life. So it is important for you to gather information where you can from different sources. Okay, so we've talked about this. So we've got social communication, social, learning, mobility, self-care and self-management. We've just talked about that before. And so I just wanted to cover what each of those mean, because they sound obvious, but they're not necessarily obvious. And this is really critical when we're talking to our professionals who, and particularly our GPs or paediatricians who are writing some evidence for us or writing a report, and what they need to take into account. So communication. So it includes being understood in spoken, written or sign language, understanding others and expressing needs and wants by gesture, speech or contact, or it being in context to appropriate age or age appropriate. So your social interaction includes making and keeping friends, interacting with the community, behaving within limits accepted by others, coping with feelings and emotions in a social context. So learning, they consider that learning needs to include understanding and remembering information, learning new things, practicing and using new skills. Mobility. So this means the ability of a person to move around the home, to undertake ordinary activities of daily living, and quite often we'll hear ADL as an acronym for activities of daily living. So getting in and out of bed or a chair, as we've discussed before, leaving the home, moving about in the community and performing other tasks requiring the use of your limbs. So self-care means activities related to personal care, hygiene, grooming and feeding oneself, including showering, bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, grooming and caring for your own health needs. And self-management means the cognitive capacity to organise one's life, to plan and make decisions and to take responsibility for oneself, including completing daily tasks, managing decisions, problem solving and managing finances. So that's a lot and it's a mouthful, but those two slides that we just covered are really the backbone or the core of how and what the NDIS will assess your application against. Okay, so when your therapists or your specialists are writing this information, it is critical that they can use that in context. The good news is we have some information that we can share to your professionals that you can take to them to help maximise your opportunity for being able to get onto the NDIS the first time. Quite often people might give it a go for 2 or 3 times. So please don't be distressed if you don't get on the first time, but we're here today to maximise your opportunity of getting on the first time. Okay, so in your evidence, and this is going to be shared again at the end, so please don't think that you have to take notes on absolutely everything. I will share the slides. So your evidence needs to provide a summary or a statement of who you are, your interests, and what is important to you. Now, this information, sorry, I should just preface with the fact that I'm actually encouraging you as the participant or as the carer of a person to actually write your own statement. And I think this is a crucial thing that can be missed, and it is overwhelming, but without knowing who you are and what you stand for and what the barriers are in your life and how you want to live your life, I'm not quite sure how the NDIS can make decisions that are holistic, okay? And I'll explain that in a minute. So again, who are you? What do you love? What do you like? What are you interested in? What's important to you? If you've had an injury and now have a disability, what was your life like before? And what is it that you want out of life in the future? It's really, really important and extraordinarily powerful. They will want to know, and I think it's important that you share your diagnosis of your disability, any other disabilities, and other relevant health issues as well. This is providing the NDIS with context to your disability and your life, because we don't live in silos. We do not live in silos where my disability is over here and my health is over here, and never the two shall meet. It just doesn't happen like that. Really important is to share about your living arrangements and your relationships as well. Again, are you living alone? Are you living with a family? Do you have caring responsibilities? Do you have other responsibilities? Are you living in a townhouse, or are you living in the country? All of these are really, really important information, particularly around your relationships, because the NDIS will assess but also expect that there is a shared responsibility between the NDIS and what we call informal carers, right? So that could be, you could be a parent, you could be a child providing care, you could be a friend. So there is an expectation that your informal supports will provide care, but there's also other supports as well that will provide support to you that are provided, say, out in the community or by other government departments. So they need to know about you. I think it's really nice to provide an example of a day in the life of you, or some sort of context about how your life goes from day to day. And so you might choose to do that in just a list of, these are the things I need to do, or you might have a bit of a table where you go through between 7 and 9, this happens, 9 and 12, this happens. And that would be about maybe medication taking, maybe it's how you get ready in the morning, where you go off for the day, maybe you go out into the community, maybe you go to school or you need to go to school, maybe you have therapies. There's a whole range of things that happens in your life every day, and it's important that you can list that. And if you are having barriers and challenges to be able to do those things, include that information in that table. So that's a nice segue into the next point, which is about barriers and challenges that you face and the real impacts of your disability on your day-to-day life. Be real, it's no good sugarcoating it. I'm not a fan of people sort of spruiking, share your worst day and make it all doom and gloom, but give a dose of reality about what it is you face and, the things that are good in your life, but you also need to share the things that really do get in the way of you living your best life. That's critical. And of course, your goals, like I said at the beginning of this slide, where do you want to be? Who are you? What are you passionate about? Because if we go right back to the beginning of our presentation, we talked about your goals and where you want to be, what you want to be doing in life. And the NDIS really supports independence for people and that contribution to social and community, and of course, being able to have a career or be able to participate in some other way to community.
Good, Cassie. Just a couple of questions. So, in your experience with that personal statement, is that a page or a couple of pages, or obviously it depends upon the person, but, have you got any rough guidance around that?
Yeah. This is really up to everyone. I probably would avoid doing more than 2 pages. You might want to do up to 2 pages and have, say, a table for your a day in the life of. When you're presenting information to the NDIS, it's a great question. When you're presenting information to anyone, but particularly to the NDIS, reams and reams of paper with big paragraphs, with lots and lots of information, that information could be really important, but it's extraordinarily difficult to read and very difficult to be able to decipher what is in there. So if you're doing that, and if you are going to do a statement, I would highly encourage you to do nice clear headings, use lots of space between each of your paragraphs. You could put it in a table if you wanted to, but I would be really careful about how you present that information, because the NDIS may very well skim read. And so if you're putting, you know, a couple of different headings, one might be about me, another might be my diagnosis, who I live with, or my relationships, barriers and challenges, and where I want to be. You know, that they could be 5 key areas that you can have some headings for. I just find it's going to be a lot more of an accessible document if you do that.
For sure. And just in your experience, like pulling all of this information together, I mean, again, it will vary, but, you know, what sort of time commitment do you think it is, you know, on average to pull your information, but the information from the practitioners as well?
Yeah, it's certainly not a quick process, and it is an exhausting one, because I expect for a lot of people, lots of things are going to come up. This sort of process can trigger you, and so getting help with it is incredibly important. This isn't going to happen in a matter of days. This is going to take weeks, and you know, trying to do everything in you know, say a 6-hour block is going to be extremely exhausting. So I would recommend that you space it out, that you do get some help. So local area coordinators, as I said before, which are like brokers, if you like, if you want to sort of draw a comparison, like brokers for the NDIS, they're actually called partners. They can help you with some of this information and gathering this information as well. But mostly I think it's going to rely on maybe your family and friends. Maybe you're in a hospital though, or in a care setting, and you might have access to a social worker who can help you with some of this information as well. If you are in a hospital, there are disability liaison officers who will be able to help fast track your access as well. So there's some different ways to get access. If you do know a support coordinator, they can also provide you with some help to gather this information, but that's not paid. But they might provide either an in-kind service, or they might provide, you know, that at a small charge as well. But it is quite extensive. It does take a lot.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for that.
Okay, so this is getting to the meaty part of it now. So in February this year, so February 2021, the access request form was updated and brought in to try and make this process a lot easier for people. And so there are 2 sections to that access request form. Section 1 is for you to complete, or for you as the carer or participant to complete, and section 2 is for the treaty professional. So section 1 is all of your personal information. It'll give you the opportunity to share all of your age, your residence, who you might give permission to talk to the NDIS with. It'll ask you for your background, lots and lots of different questions, just like you would have to, say, if you were applying to Centrelink or any other government department. Okay, so again, your local area coordinator can help you complete that part of the form, and they do that at no charge. That's a community service that they do provide. And you can also contact the 1-800 number here, 1-800-800-110, and you can actually make a verbal request. Okay, but you're still going to, so that they can action that request straight away. You're still going to need to collect all of the other information and send that through anyway. So this is up to you how you would prefer to proceed. So section 1 is about you. Yes, Wendy.
Sorry, just clarifying, Cassie, is this an online form or is this a physical form?
Yeah, it's an online form. and it looks like this. Okay, and so I will give you the link to that in the information that's sent out to everybody. I thought there would be questions about what it looks like, so that's what the actual access request form looks like. Okay, and then there's reams of paper. So section 2 is really about for your treating professional to complete. Now, this doesn't have to necessarily be your specialist. So, for instance, let's just say you've been in hospital, you have a physical disability, you've had an operation, and you do have, maybe you've lost a limb or something else has happened, and you've got a lot of reports from the specialist, but you're not necessarily in direct contact with them all the time. But you do have a GP or another specialist that you do get to see who knows you on a more regular basis. That person is the best person to be able to complete this form for you. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to be the person that might have undertaken your operation or treated you in an acute setting. Okay, so the person who knows you the best is the best person to fill out this form. So it's an NDIS form, as we've discussed, and section 2 needs to be completed by them. Part E is the most critical part of the information that I really do, or the form, sorry, rather, that I do want to share some information about, because this is where people can get tripped up. And this is where, if this form isn't filled out correctly, then you're going to come in up against barriers and highly likely can be declined access. So part E is where we look at that funny word, functional capacity, but it's so important. Now, we know NDIS and the medical or the health system have different languages almost. They talk in different terms. And quite often the medical profession don't necessarily understand that. That's not their fault. They're not necessarily trained, but there can be huge issues in translation of information. And so this is where it's really important that you work closely with your medical professionals.
And is this a large form, or, you know, again, is it quite time consuming?
It is a large form. However, sharing it will make it easier. So as I was saying, the interpretation of support requirements is something that can quite often get lost. So I'm just going to give some tips about how we can overcome that. So we need to focus very much on independence, what we can do independently without any support. That is the most important thing for us to consider. So if we go to the next slide, I'm actually going to give you an example here. So before, we talked about a range of different areas that the NDIS needs to really focus on to be able to assess whether a person meets criteria and access criteria. So self-care is one of those things. So you might go into your doctor's office and share some of this information. I'm going to just read it out, and then we're going to just talk about how different interpretation can make a huge difference. So Joe's 21 years old and lives with autism and is at home with his family. He carries out most personal care tasks physically, but requires coaching and scaffolding to know when to shower, what to wash, what parts of his body to wash, when to brush his teeth, not teen, choosing what to wear and when to eat. Now, he can do most of those things for himself, but he needs a lot of coaching, some structure, some routines and reminders by, say, other people, by charts, by a whole range of different things to be able to do those tasks. So yes, Joe can do those things. However, he needs help. Now, if you go to the doctor and the doctor's filling out this form and it comes to the self-care question, and does Joe need help with self-care? And Joe goes, yes, I can do those things. And the doctor ticks, no, doesn't need help. That's actually not true. He does need support. He needs coaching support. So that might not be physical support. So we need to change our thinking and our thought processes when it comes to what support you need to access. Okay, and so with that, there is some really great tools that are available for specialists to be able to get the language right. Okay, so the Summer Foundation have provided some really extraordinary tools for not just our medical professionals, but for the sector in general. And so here they've got a tool called Getting the Language Right. And that is a great tool to be able to share with your specialists and to even be able to have a look at yourself if you want to. That will give some context on what is medical and how you can frame that or phrase it in an NDIS speak or an NDIS language, if you like. So use that link. I will send it through. But if specialists can be really, really clear with NDIS terminology, be clear and concise with their language, okay? So not lots and lots and lots of words, be very clear, very specific. Concentrate on the functional impact or impairment when they're putting together their information, not necessarily the diagnosis, okay? Super important. Concentrate on the functional impact or the impairment. So that to you might be the barriers or the things that get in the way of you being able to walk to the shop or go to work or to be able to sleep or to be able to interact with your family, the things that get in the way. And of course, if they don't understand, please encourage them to get help if required, or for you to be able to provide them with that help. If you're going in, say you're a parent, and you're going into your doctor's office and you are taking your child with you, you're not going to necessarily want to talk about all of those things in front of your child. You don't want to necessarily say such and such can't do this and can't do that. And so then I would perhaps write or provide some information in writing for your specialist. You could print off the form and pencil in some of the things that get in the way or the barriers, just to make it that little bit easier. And I know for a fact that your specialist will like it. Some may be a little bit funny that you're trying to do their job for them. However, this is a partnership. Okay, so everyone wants you to get the best out of this process. So that's the Summer Foundation, Getting the Language Right. Any questions? We're all good?
I think we're pretty good. So then you're on to submitting your application. I guess if you could also talk, Cassie, about what's the usual experience going back and forth, or how long you have to wait, just those very practical things. That'd be great.
Sure. So we'll cover those first. How long do you have to wait is how long is a piece of string. Recently, I supported somebody to access the NDIS, and it took a number of months to gather all of this information together for her, and that a lot of that was around her own barriers in regard to her anxiety and her depression and her fear of not being accepted onto the NDIS. So we needed to work through some of that stuff. However, once we submitted the application, it took less than 7 days to go in and actually come back. Now that is lightning fast, and I've not heard of that before. However, it just depends. If you've provided all of the information and it's very clear, it's going to be a much easier process for everybody. Okay, so submitting your application. So I just wanted to talk through the different ways that you can submit your application. So most of it, the core information that you need to provide is in that access request form, and you will be required to provide copies of things such as, your 100 points of ID
as well, and any evidence if you are a resident here but not an Australian citizen, then you're going to need to provide some of that evidence as well. Don't forget to attach all of your evidence, all of the reports that you have. Now, depending on how you submit them, I would always recommend that if you are putting them in electronically, that you convert them to PDF format so that nothing can be changed. And also either don't provide original reports or assessments, or keep copies of them, because the NDIS won't keep them. They won't send them back to you. All right. And so if you're sending the only copies you have of all of those reports, they are going to go into the NDIS big black hole, never to be seen again. Now, those documents should be uploaded to your file, but when you're 3 or 4 years down the track, they're not necessarily going to be able to access those documents readily. So I would always advocate for you to keep copies, and I would early on set up a folder for yourself, whether that's electronically or whether it's hard copy folder of all of your core information, and start keeping and filing your information early, because otherwise it will end up in big boxes. Yes, I'm talking from experience, and you'll be searching here, there and everywhere, and you will lose things. So if you've got one key place that you keep all of the information, that is going to lessen your stress. Just a little side tip there. So do send your evidence and your access request form via email to NAT, all in uppercase, nat@ndis.gov.au. You can mail it if you'd like to send hard copies to GPO Box 700, Canberra, ACT 2601. And you can also take them and present them in person to an NDIS or LAC, Local Area Coordinator Office. I have been known to support people to do both by mail and email, but I'm just overly cautious as well. I just don't think it can hurt one way or another, and just mention in both correspondence that you have sent email copy or you have sent a hard copy as well.
I was just going to ask, Cassie, is there a better way to do it, or have you found one's quicker than the other, or is it about the same?
It's up to you. The NDIS does have a big backlog at the moment of online things, so email and that sort of thing. So, you know, you can always ring up to say you're requesting access. You can get a reference number or a receipt number, and you can then include that in the email or in your mail, so that there's already a request in process, and then you've sent the evidence to follow up. That's probably the best way, but it's really however is the most accessible for you otherwise. If you are emailing, you can always back that up with emailing it to another NDIS email, which is enquiries@ndis.gov.au, just as a little backup. But that's what I do. I just always like to ensure that there is more information or people seeing your information than less. Things do get lost. These are government departments that we're talking to here, and I would rather you be covered than not. So I guess I just want to do a little summary here. It does sound like a lot of information. All of this information will be uploaded to the Carers Place website and will also be sent out to you. And part of that information that will be sent is a checklist. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. There is a lot of information. If you do have questions, please do get in contact with us. I'm more than happy to answer those questions as well. If you do have questions, you can email them directly to hello@thecarersplace.com.au. We'll put that information in the email and send that out to you as well. Do we have any other questions, Wendy?
Yeah, I guess once you sort of go through this process, and then how does the notification come back to you, and what are the next steps after that?
Yeah. Okay, so the NDIS will generally call you if that's what your preference is in terms of communication, and in that access request form, you will indicate how you would prefer to be communicated with. And so if that is phone call, then they will call you. They may email you, but generally, even if you've clicked on prefer email, they'll probably still call you. And then you will get written notifications sent to either your email or posted out. And then the NDIS will contact you to schedule a planning meeting. And if you go to booklet 2, there are 3 booklets. If you were to refer to booklet 2, and you can Google that, booklet 2 NDIS, it will come up, and that will get you thinking about what you need to consider next. So just in short, I might just give a few tips if you're okay with that, Wendy.
Yeah, for sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, so if you think back to all of those areas where we were talking about self-care, mobility and management, if you look at some of those barriers, what would be really great for you to be able to do is maybe do some dot points or jot down some ideas on some of the things that might be able to help with those barriers, or to reduce those barriers or mitigate some of the risks that you might currently have. And, you know, so not putting too much pressure on yourself, but if you're saying, I'm really struggling with this and I'm really struggling with that, however, getting this kind of help or that kind of help would be really great, then you're getting yourself started. I wouldn't want to put too much pressure on yourself, and you're not going to be able to think of everything, so that's okay too. But start having conversations with people. I'm sure that you know other people who are on the NDIS, so they may be able to give some thoughts or ideas, but be careful, okay? It's like Chinese whispers out there, so just take it, take the information, and, you know, don't necessarily believe everything that you hear. But also, so do that, think about where you want to be. So coming back to that document that I was talking about, who you are, what your life's about, and what are the things that you'd like to be doing in your life. Consider that as well. And so you've got some information prepared for that planning meeting. You can take along somebody with you, and in booklet 2 it will actually go through a range of questions and things for you to consider during that planning meeting. It'll talk about what to expect and what you can expect out of that process.
Just another question or two. Is there like a minimum or maximum funding amount that participants are eligible for that then goes to providers, or is it just very open?
No, it's not. There's absolutely no minimum or maximum. Some people are on the NDIS and actually, while they're on the NDIS, have paused funding, so they actually don't necessarily have a funding package, so it can be 0. And then I've seen packages that are well into the millions. So it's really dependent on what your functional impairment is, and there's I guess an algorithm in the back of the NDIS system, and a bunch of different criteria that the NDIS enter in, and, you know, recommended funding packages will come up. However, that's not everything. That's not the only process that the NDIS go through. So they're going to look at where you are in your journey, your age, and all of the contextual information that I was talking about, like, you know, do you have supports? Are you isolated? There are a whole range of other things. Are there complex health needs? Do you have, you know, other involvement with other government departments, such as health, or maybe DCP, or housing needs? There's a whole host of other considerations that the NDIS then make, and then information is actually submitted to a delegate who can approve or decline recommended support. So it's quite a complex process.
For sure. And I guess just on that, in terms of, you know, providers, so do most participants have more than one kind of like provider that they work with, because they've got a variety of different things that they could be tapping into? Or do most people just, like, is it good to have somebody in mind, or to check out, you know, which providers might suit you?
Yeah, great question. So there would likely be a variety of different providers. So the NDIS funds different categories or different buckets of money, if you like. So one category is called capacity building, and so that's specific to your skill development, or it can be any therapeutic support. So there's buckets of money there for that. But then there's another bucket of money for core supports, which is things like funding for your day-to-day life and supports either at home, with your personal care, or out in the community. And then there's also another bucket of money for capital equipment, which is like your assistive technology. So that could be anything from a wheelchair to a tipper kettle, and anything in between. And so it's highly unlikely that you're going to get all of your supports from the one provider. In fact, I would highly discourage anyone to get all supports by the one provider. While it seems like a great idea and makes it much easier for you, it does put you at risk, and I think it is really important to have different sets of eyes on you and on your circumstances to reduce your risk, and to ensure that everything that you get, all of your supports that you get, are kosher as well. So you might also have you can request support from a support coordinator if you do have more complex circumstances where you need a higher level of support to navigate the NDIS. That's when support coordinators can come into play. Otherwise, your local area coordinator will help you find different providers within your community. However, they can't recommend anyone necessarily. So there's lots of different providers that you'll probably start working with, and it can be overwhelming. But remember to breathe and just do one thing at a time. And the most important thing is, if you can understand your plan and get some help with that, then you're going to be able to make more informed decisions. There are different ways that plans are funded as well. So the most common way these days is via plan management, and that basically means you've got some flexibility to use different providers from your plan, but they don't have to be registered providers. Your plan manager is like your accountant, and they process all of your claims. They do have a lot of knowledge about the NDIS, so they can answer questions about whether something's appropriate to access or to buy or not, and they will communicate with your providers as well. So your plan manager, if you don't have support coordination and you're a little bit confused, your plan manager may very well be able to help you. So if your plan is plan managed, the first thing you want to do is find a good plan manager.
Excellent. That's great, Cassie. I think we need to probably wrap up now, but are there any other final hints or tips that you wanted to touch on?
Just do get support where you can. It can be complex. Give yourself a break. Not everything has to be perfect. But if you are in a setting where you do have access to a social worker, a support coordinator, maybe a government-funded organisation such as, say, Anglicare or Uniting Communities, where they provide this sort of support through government funding, then I would highly recommend that you connect in with them at the very least as you're going through this process, and do lean on family and friends. We have a private support group on Facebook as well that you can access, where you can ask lots of questions, and people are really lovely there. So that's called Parents and Carers Connect. I will send the link through with the information as well. So that isn't a support group that is spammed or anything like that. Is just purely for connection and support.
So that's great. Well, thanks, Cassie. Thanks on behalf of everyone here. Very generous with your time, and appreciate that people can, follow up with you and tap into all of those resources. So thanks so much for joining us, and we might see people with the other workshops, which are sort of more focused on serving the client's needs in relation to NDIS. But really appreciate your time, and we'll catch you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.